You look at him and you see a man's face, but inside you sense a child still lingering in orbit. Financial instability, failed relationships, emotional immaturity. He wears the skin of a grown person, but inside, something froze. That freeze was born long ago, in the quiet spaces where he was never asked to grow up. He was the child whose agency was always constrained. Maybe he had a parent or parents who couldn't tolerate his mistakes, who swooped in to solve rather than let him fail. Perhaps responsibility was scavenged from him early, bills paid, decisions made, choices curtailed under the guise of, "We just know best." At some point, he stopped being invited to become a man and started being managed like a perpetual adolescent. In that dynamic, independence feels dangerous. Exercise it once, face criticism. Choose for yourself, and you're punished for being ungrateful. So the part of him that could grow was suffocated. It receded. Eventually, emotional growth stalled, not because he's lazy, but because the environment made growth unsafe. As he aged physically, his emotional age remained rooted in adolescence. He retains that ambivalent attachment to responsibility, craving autonomy, yet terrified of failing it. His inner world is a battleground of fear and longing. Fear of abandonment, fear of being seen as weak, fear of not being enough. Longing for permission to be himself, to choose his own path, to make mistakes without shame. When failure arrives, and it always does for someone who never learned self-trust, he collapses. "I'm not cut out for this. I'm not good enough. Others have it easier." He becomes an internal critic's playground. His narrative becomes watered-down versions of self-blame and avoidance. His relationships mirror the childhood dynamic. He gravitates toward caretakers or controllers. He invites mothers dressed as partners or authority figures. He expects someone to manage his emotional life for him. He resists real intimacy because intimacy demands that part of him he has abandoned. The part capable of full vulnerability, full accountability, full presence. He may appear charming, funny, fun, even dependable in small doses. But under stress, the mask fractures. He reverts to defense mode, avoidance, denial, projection, blame. He may disappear when things get real, or lash out at flaws in others to dodge flaws in himself. It's not that he never grew, it's that he grew under sabotage. He carries internalized voices. "You'll never amount to anything. Why try if you'll fail? You're always a burden." Those voices formed in moments when no one was there to say, "You can try, you can fail. I'm here anyway." He learned that failure meant rejection, so he trained himself not to risk. If we trace the cause deeper, often his parents needed control or adoration more than they needed a son. A mother who felt unloved may have stunted his growth to keep him beholden. A father who couldn't trust might never hand over emotional authority. That boy, he became their project, their extension, not their equal. In being managed, his blueprint for adulthood was stolen. The effects are layered. He wrestles with imposter syndrome, not just in work, but in life itself. He questions his right to occupy space. He apologizes too much. He overcompensates, then underdelivers. He's torn between wanting freedom and fearing its weight. Anxiety haunts him. Depression lingers. His creativity, his dreams, they flicker, but often feel unreachable because his internal map never got updated. In his body, there's tension. A tight chest, a racing heart, a stomach knot when choices loom. He senses the chasm between who he could be and who others expect him to remain. He carries guilt for wanting more. He carries shame for not being more robust. He carries grief for the boy he never got to become. Yet, in that pain lies his possibility. The very sensitivity that shamed him is a doorway to emotional depth. The very fear that stalled him is a clue to what needs healing. The very longings he denies are signposts pointing to purpose. The remedy begins with awareness. He must see that his immaturity is not fate, it's a wound. He must name the voices in him not as truth, but as echoes of caretakers who never gave him room to grow. He must track patterns of blame, avoidance, control, and accountability, not to shame himself, but to understand himself. He must begin to practice small acts of adulthood, paying a bill on time, keeping a promise to himself, choosing when it hurts. Each small growth recalibrates his nervous system to safety. Each boundary he honors teaches the parts of him that he is trustworthy. Therapy or mentorship can help, but more, he must reparent himself. That inner boy needs validation, tough love, grace. He must learn to respond to failure with compassion, not collapse. He must give himself permission to be wrong. He must learn resilience not by brute force, but by consistency. He should surround himself with models of mature men, not perfect, but accountable, honest, emotionally present. He must watch how they lead, how they heal, how they love. He must find mirrors, not controllers. Over time, the cause and effect loop begins to shift. The boy learns that growth isn't something forced on him. It's something he can step into. The more he practices integrity, the more he proves to his internal system that he is reliable. The more he shows up, the stronger he becomes. Eventually, he stands in the truth that he was never condemned to be small. He was conditioned to be controlled, and releasing that conditioning is his radical act. At some point, confrontation may come. To the parent who stunted him, he will have to say either, "I am no longer your project," or, "I won't perform your fantasies for you anymore." The parent may resist, punish, or smear, but he has already rehearsed integrity in his internal world. When he steps fully into manhood, he doesn't become cold or distant. He becomes himself, capable of depth, failure, vulnerability, commitment. He carries tenderness without collapse. He feels worthy even when others doubt him. This is not a story of blame. It's a story of transformation. The boy that never grew up can heal, can grow, not because someone gives him permission, but because he finally claims it. The boy that never grew up eventually faces a crossroads, not an external moment where someone gives him an ultimatum or a partner leaves him for being emotionally unavailable, though that may happen too. No, this turning point is quieter, lonelier. It happens when he stares at his own reflection and realizes he no longer recognizes himself. Or worse, he does, and he hates what he sees. There is no one left to blame, no room left to hide. He is fully alone with his pain, and finally, that pain speaks clearly. I cannot stay like this. This is where real transformation begins, not in shame, not in guilt, but in unbearable honesty. He sees the ruins of half-built dreams, relationships he sabotaged, talents left unused, and he realizes that the problem wasn't always that life was unfair. The problem is that he was waiting for someone to save him, someone to validate him, someone to crown him a man. But no one is coming. And strangely, that truth isn't devastating, it's liberating. Because if no one is coming, then he must become the one who saves himself. For the first time, he understands what responsibility truly means. Not punishment, not burden, but power. The kind of power that comes from finally owning your story, no matter how broken it is. The boy that never grew up starts small. He begins to listen to himself in a new way. Not the inner critic that mimics his mother or father, but the quiet, aching voice that asks for more. He begins to track how he avoids the white lies, the procrastination, the emotional numbing. He doesn't judge it yet. He just watches. He learns himself like a researcher studies a wild animal, not to tame it, but to understand its fears. He begins to heal by grieving. Grieving the childhood he never had. Grieving the praise he never received. Grieving the years he spent performing, pretending, pleasing. Grieving the fact that the people who were supposed to raise him often didn't even know how to raise themselves. And as those tears come, violent, private, relentless, a part of him softens. He stops posturing, he stops defending. And in that collapse, something else begins to rise. He learns to speak his truth, not to punish others, but to reclaim himself. He tells his partner, "I've been scared to lead because I never learned how." He tells his friend, "I avoid conflict because I don't want to be abandoned." He tells himself, "I've been acting like a victim, and I want to change." These aren't just words. They're evidence. Evidence that the boy is waking up inside the man. He starts to take ownership of his patterns. When he breaks trust, he names it. When he avoids a hard conversation, he returns and reopens it. He stops ghosting and starts showing up, not perfectly, but consistently. And each time he does, his inner world begins to trust him a little more. The chaos that used to rule his nervous system begins to calm. He no longer panics when he's not praised. He no longer seeks validation in recklessness. He doesn't need a mother in his lover. He doesn't need to be babied. He wants to be challenged, seen, respected, and he offers the same in return. Slowly, he earns back his own self-respect. He develops rituals, journaling, workouts, therapy, prayer, art, silence. He cultivates discipline, not because someone is watching, but because he wants to feel proud of who he is in the dark. He keeps promises, he tracks progress, he forgives himself, and then demands more of himself in that exact order. He becomes dangerous, not in a toxic way, but in a holy way. Dangerous to systems that depended on his submission. Dangerous to family members who only loved the version of him that stayed small. Dangerous to environments that reward apathy, shallowness, and obedience. And here's the twist. Once he becomes this version of himself, people begin to change how they treat him. The same family who dismissed him starts to show respect. The same friends who doubted him begin asking him for advice. The world that once seemed cruel or indifferent now reflects his new stance. Why? Because people respond to your self-concept. When he believed he was incapable, others treated him accordingly. But now, he radiates clarity. He speaks with weight. He doesn't over-explain. He doesn't chase. He doesn't prove. He simply is. And yet, he doesn't hold a grudge against the past. He understands now. Most people are just playing out their own wounds. His mother who controlled him? She was probably terrified of losing love. His father who ignored him? Maybe he was never taught how to nurture. Everyone is trapped in a cycle until someone decides to break it. And now, that someone is him. He doesn't need revenge. He doesn't need applause. He needs alignment. So he forgives, not to excuse, but to free himself. He lets go of needing his parents to be different. He lets go of needing old friends to understand. He carries the lessons. He drops the resentment. And finally, he sees his inner child, not as something to bury, but something to reclaim. The curiosity, the wonder, the imagination. These aren't signs of immaturity. They're signs of life.